I thought my wedding day would be perfect. The golden autumn leaves were dancing in the Boston breeze, the historic St. Peter's Cathedral bells were chiming, and my white dress was everything I'd dreamed of. But in a matter of minutes, my mother-in-law, Victoria, turned my dream into a nightmare when she burst through those cathedral doors and accused me of something that would change my life forever. As I stood in the bridal suite of St. Peter's Cathedral, my heart fluttered with excitement. The September breeze carried the sweet scent of autumn through the stained glass windows, and Boston's historic skyline painted a perfect backdrop for what should have been the most beautiful day of my life. My best friend Olivia was helping me adjust my veil, her gentle hands steadying my trembling fingers as I smoothed down the delicate lace of my dress. "Hannah, you look absolutely breathtaking," Olivia whispered, her eyes meeting mine in the antique mirror. I smiled, trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. After 2 years of planning and 5 years of loving Christopher, this moment felt surreal. The distant sound of guests arriving echoed through the cathedral's halls, mixing with the soft classical music that floated up from the main chamber. But fate had other plans for my perfect day. The first sign that something was wrong came when I heard raised voices from the cathedral's entrance. At first, I dismissed it as typical pre-wedding chaos, but then the voices grew louder, more hostile. Olivia and I exchanged worried glances. "What's going on?" I whispered, my stomach tightening with anxiety. Before Olivia could respond, my father burst into the bridal suite, his face ashen. "Hannah, sweetheart," he began, his voice trembling. "There's a situation." The words had barely left his lips when the door flew open again, this time with such force that it slammed against the wall. Victoria Anderson, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, stood in the doorway, her face contorted with rage. Her perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, and her eyes blazed with an intensity that made me take a step back. "You deceitful little thief!" she screamed, pointing an accusing finger at me. The pearl necklace she always wore rattled with her fury. "How dare you try to marry my son when you've been stealing from our family?" The room fell silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some of the bridesmaids who had gathered in the hallway gasped. My father stepped forward protectively, but Victoria wasn't finished. "The family diamonds," she spat. "The ones that have been in our family for 4 generations. They're missing. And I know you took them. You've been eyeing them since Christopher first brought you to our home." I stood frozen, my mind racing to comprehend what was happening. The Anderson family diamonds, a stunning set of earrings and a bracelet that Victoria had shown me once, locked away in their family safe. I'd admired them, yes, but steal them? The accusation was absurd. "Victoria, I don't understand," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't taken anything. I would never." "Save your lies," she interrupted. "We trusted you, welcomed you into our home, and this is how you repay us? By stealing our family heirlooms to what? Pay for this lavish wedding?" The commotion had drawn more attention. Christopher appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and concern. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across his features. That glimpse of doubt in my fiancé's eyes felt like a knife to my heart. "Chris," I pleaded, reaching out to him. "You know I would never do this. Please." But Christopher remained silent, looking between his mother and me with growing distress. Victoria seized on his hesitation, pressing her advantage. "Christopher, darling, I tried to warn you about her. A girl from her background, suddenly interested. In an Anderson? She's nothing but a gold digger." The words stung like physical blows. My background? My father was a respected professor, my mother a dedicated nurse. We weren't wealthy like the Andersons, but we had always lived with dignity and honesty. Tears welled in my eyes as I watched the man I loved, the man I was about to marry, standing, There speechless while his mother slandered me in front of everyone we knew. Olivia stepped forward, her voice sharp with anger. "This is ridiculous. Hannah would never steal anything. Victoria, you're ruining their wedding day over an accusation, without any proof." But Victoria wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone, displaying photos of her open safe, empty velvet boxes scattered inside. "The diamonds were there yesterday. Today they're gone, and you were the only outsider in our house this week, helping with wedding preparations. The police are already on their way." My world spun. Police? This couldn't be happening. Through my tears, I saw Christopher finally move, approaching me slowly. "Hannah," he said, his voice strained. "If you took them, just give them back. We can work through this." His words hit me like a physical blow. He believed her. After 5 years together, after all we'd shared, he actually thought I could be capable of this. The realization shattered something deep inside me. "How dare you?" I whispered, my voice gaining strength with each word. "How dare you stand there and think for even a moment that I would do this? I loved you, Christopher. I loved you enough to put up with your mother's constant criticism, her snide remarks about my family, her attempts to control every aspect of our wedding. But this is unforgivable." The cathedral's grand hall had fallen silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I could hear whispers from the guests who had gathered in the doorway, their judging eyes burning into me. My father stepped forward, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Victoria, if you don't retract these accusations right now—" "Or what, Professor?" she sneered. "You'll do what? The police will sort this out. I want those diamonds, found before anyone leaves this church." I looked at Christopher one last time, searching his face for any sign of the man I thought I knew, the man I had agreed to spend my life with. But all I saw was confusion and doubt. In that moment, something inside me hardened. Without a word, I grabbed my small purse and pushed past Victoria, past Christopher, past the crowd of staring guests. "Hannah, wait!" Olivia called after me. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't breathe. I ran down the cathedral steps, my white dress trailing behind me, tears blurring my vision. I heard footsteps behind me. Olivia and my father had followed. "Get her in the car," my father instructed. "Olivia," his voice tight with concern, "take her to your place. I'll handle things here." The next hour passed in a blur. Olivia drove me to her apartment in Cambridge, away from the whispers, the accusations, the betrayal. As she helped me out of my wedding dress, my phone exploded, with messages and missed calls. Most were from Christopher, some from his family members, others from concerned guests. I turned it off, unable to face any of them. "What am I going to do?" I whispered, sitting on Olivia's couch in borrowed clothes, my elaborate updo now a mess of fallen curls. "My reputation, my job. Everyone will think—" "Stop," Olivia said firmly, sitting beside me. "Anyone who knows you knows this is absurd. We'll figure this out." A knock at the door made us both jump. My father entered, his face grim but determined. "The police are at the Anderson house," he reported. "They're conducting a search." "Hannah, darling, they'll want to talk to you too." I nodded numbly. "Did Christopher—" I couldn't finish the question. My father's expression hardened. "He's with his mother. Hannah, I hate to say this, but maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Any man who wouldn't stand by you in a moment like this." The weekend passed in a fog of tears, police interviews, and endless questions. Olivia's apartment became my sanctuary, a place to hide from. The whispers and stares that seemed to follow me everywhere. The local news had picked up the story. Bride accused of stealing family heirlooms on wedding day, turning my personal nightmare into public entertainment. Detective Martinez sat across from me in Olivia's living room, her dark eyes watchful, as she took notes. "Ms. Mitchell, Walk me through your visits to the Anderson house last week. I recounted each visit, my voice hollow. Tuesday afternoon, helping with flower arrangements. Thursday evening, dropping off welcome baskets for out-of-town guests. Friday morning, final details with the wedding planner. Each time, Victoria had been present, watching me like a hawk. And you never went near Mr. Anderson's study, where the safe is located? Never, I replied firmly. I didn't even know the safe's exact location until Victoria showed everyone the photos. The detective nodded, making another note. Mrs. Anderson seems quite certain of your guilt. Victoria has never wanted me to marry her son, I said, quietly. She's made that clear from day one, but I never thought she'd go this far. After the detective left, Olivia brought me a cup of tea and sat beside me. Hannah, you need to eat something. You haven't touched food since yesterday. I stared at my reflection in the tea's surface. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my face looked gaunt. My phone buzzed again. Christopher's 20th attempt to reach me. This time, I picked up. Hannah, please, his voice cracked. Just tell me the truth. If you took them, we can fix this. Mother might not press charges. I hung up, my hand shaking. Olivia took the phone gently from my grip. That's enough of that, she said firmly. Monday morning came too quickly.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I had to return to work. I couldn't hide forever. Walking into the Boston Marketing Group's offices felt like walking into a lion's den. Conversations stopped as I passed. Coworkers averted their eyes or stared too long. Richard Cooper, my boss, called me into his office before I could reach my desk. His usual friendly demeanor was replaced with careful professionalism. Hannah, given the current situation, perhaps you should take some time off. Richard, I didn't steal anything, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. This will all be cleared up soon. He shifted uncomfortably. Nevertheless, some of our clients have expressed concerns. We need to think about the company's reputation. I felt the floor dropping out from under me. 5 years of dedication, of extra hours and successful campaigns, and now my career was crumbling because of Victoria's accusations. That evening, I finally returned to my apartment in Beacon Hill. The space felt different now. All the wedding, gifts I'd have to return, photos of Christopher and me mocking me from the walls. A large envelope waited by my door. Papers from Christopher's lawyer, formally ending our engagement and requesting the return of the ring. I sank onto my couch, holding the envelope. A noise from the hallway caught my attention. Voices, then a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Emma, Christopher's sister, looking nervous. When I opened the door, she rushed in, speaking in a hurried whisper. Hannah, I had to come. There's something you need to know about the diamonds. My heart raced as Emma glanced around, as if afraid of being overheard. Mother, she's done this before. 10 years ago, before you knew Christopher. She accused our cousin's fiancé of stealing her emerald necklace, made a huge scene, broke up their engagement. 2 months later, the necklace mysteriously turned up in her jewelry box. She claimed she'd misplaced it. I stared at Emma, the implications of her words sinking in. Are you saying... Mother never wanted Christopher to marry you. She had someone from her country club in mind. Caroline Preston. Old money, right connections. Emma's voice was bitter. I should have said something sooner, but I was afraid. Mother can be vindictive. After Emma left, I sat in my darkened apartment, her words echoing in my mind. The pieces were falling into place. Victoria's increasing hostility as the wedding approached, her insistence on having me help with wedding preparations at their house, her immediate certainty of my guilt. The next morning, armed with Emma's Revelation, I made two decisions. First, I called Detective Martinez and shared what Emma had told me. Second, I marched into Richard Cooper's office, head held high. "I'm taking a leave of absence," I announced before he could speak. "Not because of the accusations, but because I need time to clear my name." To my surprise, he looked relieved, even sympathetic. "Hannah, off the record. I never believed. You did it. Take the time you need. Your position will be here when you're ready." Outside his office, I ran into Caroline Preston herself. She worked in accounting, and her smug smile told me everything I needed to know about Victoria's plans. I walked past her without a word, my mind already racing with possibilities. Back at my apartment, I started researching. Victoria Anderson's social circle, her country club connections, her past behaviors. If she had done this before, there might be a pattern. I created a timeline, noting every interaction, every subtle threat she'd made over the years. Olivia arrived that evening with takeout and determination. "I've been thinking," she said, spreading Chinese containers across my coffee table. "Remember last month when Victoria insisted on hosting that engagement brunch? How she made such a show of opening the safe to check on the diamonds?" I nodded, picking at my lo mein. She wanted everyone to know they were there. Exactly. And who was there that day, besides family? I closed my eyes, thinking back. The wedding planner, Lauren, Caroline Preston and her mother, Victoria's friend from the country club, Mrs. Whitmore, and Victoria's personal assistant, Melissa, Olivia finished, who has access to their house, knows their routines, and is completely loyal to Victoria. The pieces were falling into place. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through photos from the engagement brunch. There, in the background of a group shot. Melissa, hovering near the study door, watching Victoria's dramatic safe display with an odd expression. "We need to talk to Melissa," I said, but Olivia was already shaking her head. "Too risky. She'll warn Victoria. We need proof, not suspicions." A text from Emma lit up my phone. "Mother's throwing a dinner party tomorrow night. Everyone will be there, including Melissa. I can get you in through the service entrance." I showed Olivia the message. Her eyes widened. "Hannah, no. It's too dangerous. If Victoria catches you, then I'll finally have proof of her true colors," I said firmly. "I'm tired of hiding, Olivia. I'm tired of being the victim in her story." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Emma provided me with the house's layout, staff schedules, security codes. The dinner party would keep Victoria occupied in the dining room, giving me time to search her private spaces. Places where a vindictive woman might hide stolen jewelry to frame someone else. As I prepared for the most dangerous night of my life, my phone buzzed with a new text. "Christopher. Mother's wearing the family diamonds to her dinner party tonight. They turned up in her jewelry box this morning. She claims she misplaced them. I'm so sorry, Hannah. I should have believed you." I stared at the message, tears of rage and vindication burning my eyes. It wasn't enough. An apology wouldn't restore my reputation, wouldn't erase the public humiliation, wouldn't heal the wound of his betrayal. "I'm still going," I told Olivia, who had rushed over after I forwarded her Christopher's text. "Not for the diamonds. They were never the point. I'm going to find proof of what she did. All of it. The cousin's fiancé, me, who knows how many others. It ends tonight." Rain poured down as Olivia's car crept past the grand gates of the Anderson estate. The security guard, distracted by the stream of arriving dinner guests, barely glanced at Emma's staff entrance pass on our windshield. Through the streaming windows, I watched silhouettes of Boston's elite moving behind the mansion's illuminated windows, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Emma met us at the service entrance, her face tense. "Mother's holding court in the dining room," she whispered, ushering us inside. "The diamonds are around her neck. She's practically gloating. Melissa's supervising the catering staff in the kitchen. The service corridors felt different than the opulent halls I'd walked as Christopher's fiancée. Here, among the shadows and whispered conversations of staff members, I saw the house's true face, and Victoria's. Emma led us to a small security office, now empty thanks to her careful planning. The cameras loop every 15 minutes, she explained, pointing to the monitors. Mother's office is on the 3rd floor. Most of her personal papers are there. Melissa's desk is in the adjacent room. I pulled on latex gloves. We couldn't risk leaving fingerprints. How much time do we have? Dinner's 7 courses. They're just starting the 2nd. Maybe 2 hours before anyone comes upstairs. Olivia squeezed my hand. I'll monitor the cameras from here. Emma, you should return to the party before you're missed. Hannah, be careful. The 3rd floor was silent, heavy with old money and secrets. Victoria's office door yielded to Emma's key. The room beyond spoke volumes about its owner. Everything precisely arranged, power and wealth displayed in every detail. A portrait of Victoria dominated one wall, her eyes seeming to follow me as I moved through the space. I started with her desk, methodically photographing documents before returning them to their exact positions. Bank statements, social correspondence, country club membership files. Nothing immediately damning, but building a picture. Then, in a locked drawer that Emma's key also opened, I found something interesting. A folder labeled Family Matters. Inside were newspaper clippings about the cousins' broken engagement 10 years ago. Private investigator reports on both me and the former fiancé. Notes in Victoria's elegant handwriting detailing our backgrounds, habits, vulnerabilities. A draft of a police report about the missing diamonds, dated 3 days before my wedding. My hands shook as I photographed each page. This was it. Proof of premeditation. But I needed more. Something concrete that would be impossible to explain. Away. A sound in the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps. Then Melissa's voice. Yes, Mrs. Anderson. I'll get those files right away. My heart pounding, I slipped into Victoria's private bathroom, barely breathing as Melissa entered the office. Through the crack in the door, I watched her, retrieve something from her desk, then pause. She moved to Victoria's desk, unlocking a different drawer than the one I'd searched. From my hiding place, I couldn't see what she removed, but I heard paper rustling, then the sharp click of what sounded like a jewelry box. After she left, I waited 5 agonizing minutes before emerging. The drawer she'd opened contained more files, but beneath them was a false bottom. My fingers found the hidden catch, revealing a compartment containing a small red leather notebook and several velvet jewelry boxes. The notebook was a detailed record: dates, names, items stolen, outcomes. Not just the cousin's fiancé and me. There were others. 5 women over 15 years, all deemed unsuitable matches for wealthy family members, all accused of theft, all driven away in disgrace. My phone vibrated, Olivia's warning signal. I quickly photographed the notebook's pages, my hands trembling as I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. Victoria's systematic destruction of young women's lives lay documented in her own handwriting, each entry a calculated move in her twisted social chess game. I was halfway to the door when another text from Olivia made me stop. Victoria leaving. Dining room. Heading upstairs. Get out. Now. The hallway stretched endlessly before me. The main stairs would be suicide. Victoria was coming up that way. The service stairs were too far. My only option was the small library connecting to the adjacent wing. I slipped inside just as Victoria's voice carried up the main staircase. Melissa, bring me those papers, and tell Christopher to join me in my office. It's time we discussed damage control for this unfortunate situation. I pressed myself against the library's wood paneling, heart thundering. Voices approached, Victoria and Melissa, then Christopher's deeper tones joining them. They were right outside the door. The diamonds were in your jewelry box the whole time? Christopher's voice was strained. "Mother, do you realize what you've done? Hannah's reputation is ruined. Her job, her life." "Darling, it was an honest mistake. Anyone could have misplaced them. And really, this is for the best. That girl was never right for you. Caroline Preston, on the other hand." "Stop." Christopher's voice cracked. "Just stop. I need to see those police reports you filed, all of them." My breath caught. Was he finally beginning to question his mother's actions? The library door handle turned. I dove behind a massive leather armchair as Victoria swept in, Christopher and Melissa following. "The reports are in my office," Victoria said smoothly. "But first, let's discuss how we'll handle the press. A simple statement. The Anderson family is pleased to announce that the missing heirlooms have been recovered. No charges will be filed. Clean, elegant, and it leaves your options open for a more suitable match." "Like you left options open for Cousin Michael's fiancé?" Christopher's words hung in the air. "Emma told me everything, Mother. About the emerald necklace, about the other accusations over the years. How many lives have you destroyed by your honest mistakes?" Victoria's laugh was cold. "Really, Christopher, Emma always had such an active imagination. Melissa, the files, please." I shifted slightly, trying to see around the chair. My elbow knocked against a book, sending it tumbling. The sound was deafening in the tense room. "What was that?" Victoria demanded. Footsteps approached my hiding place. I closed my eyes, bracing for discovery. Then Christopher's voice rang out. "Enough! I don't need to see any files. I've seen enough. You arranged all of this, didn't?" "You? The missing diamonds, the police reports, everything, just like you did with the others." The silence in the library was deafening after Christopher's accusation. Victoria's porcelain mask of sophistication cracked for just a moment, revealing something dark and ugly beneath. She recovered quickly, but that glimpse told me everything. "How dare you speak to me this way?" Victoria hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Everything I've done has been for your own good. That girl would have ruined you, dragged our family name through the mud, just like the others would have done." From my hiding spot, I carefully pulled out my phone, pressing record. Victoria was too focused on Christopher to notice the slight movement behind the chair. "The others?" Christopher's voice was quiet, dangerous. "So you admit there were others. How many, Mother? How many lives have you destroyed with your accusations?" Victoria's heels clicked on the hardwood as she paced. "Destroyed? I saved you all. That waitress Michael wanted to marry? That artist? Thomas fell for? Common gold diggers, every one of them, including your precious Hannah." "Hannah was a successful marketing executive," Christopher shot back. "She made her own money, built her own career, which you've now ruined with your lies." "A career?" Victoria laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Please, she worked for one of our family's subsidiary companies. Who do you think arranged that? I had to keep her close, watch her every move, and I was right, wasn't I? The first chance she got, she tried to steal the diamonds. But she didn't steal them, did she?" Christopher's voice was thick with realization. "They were never missing. This was all an elaborate setup. You had Melissa hide them, didn't you? Just like you did with Cousin Michael's emeralds?" Melissa, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Anderson, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Don't bother denying it, Melissa," Christopher continued. "Emma found your receipt from the safety deposit box, the same box you visited the day before each of these mysterious thefts. How long have you been helping my mother destroy innocent women's lives?" My hands shook as I continued recording. Each word was another nail in Victoria's coffin, another piece of evidence to restore my reputation, and perhaps help the other women she'd targeted over the years. "Innocent?" Victoria spat the word like poison. "You're as naive as your father was. These women, They see our name, our wealth, and they plot and scheme their way in. I did what I had to do to protect this family's legacy. Your father never understood that either, which is why—" She stopped abruptly, but the damage was done. Christopher's sharp intake of breath told me he'd caught the implication. "Which is why what, Mother?" His voice was barely a whisper. "What did you do to Father?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I remembered the stories about Christopher's father, a tragic accident at their summer home 10 years ago, a fall from the cliffs that had never been fully explained. "Your father was weak," Victoria said finally, her voice devoid of emotion. "He would have let that waitress into our family, would have welcomed her with open arms, just like he welcomed all the strays and gold diggers. Someone had to maintain our standards, our position in society." "My God," Christopher breathed. "The police report said he'd been drinking that night, but Dad never drank alone. You were there. You pushed him." "I did what was necessary." Victoria's composure shattered completely. "Just like I did with Hannah, with all of them. This family's reputation is everything. Without it, we're nothing. I won't apologize for protecting what's ours." The library door burst open before Victoria could respond. Detective Martinez stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 officers. Behind them, I saw Olivia and Emma, their faces a mix of triumph and concern. "Mrs. Anderson," Detective Martinez said calmly, "I think you'll want to hear the recording we just obtained. Your full confession about the diamonds, the other false accusations, and some very interesting implications about your late husband's accident." Victoria's face went pale, her hand clutching at the diamonds around her neck. "You can't. This is private property. You have no right." "We have a warrant," Martinez cut in, holding up a document. "Based on evidence provided by your daughter Emma, and some very compelling documentation found in your safety deposit box. Melissa Turner has already given us a full statement." I stood up from behind the chair, finally revealing myself. Victoria's eyes widened with fury, then fear as she realized the full extent of her exposure. Christopher stared at me, his face a battlefield of emotions. "Hannah," he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I should have." "Mrs. Anderson," Martinez interrupted, nodding to one of her officers. "You're under arrest for filing false police reports, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. We'll also be reopening the investigation into your husband's death." As the officers led Victoria away, her perfect facade crumbled completely. She thrashed against their hold, her carefully styled hair coming undone. "Everything I did was for this family. Christopher, you can't let them do this. I'm your mother." But Christopher turned away, his shoulders shaking. Emma moved to his side, wrapping an arm around him as Victoria's protests faded down the hallway. The dinner guests below had fallen silent, no doubt hearing the commotion. Olivia rushed to me, enveloping me in a fierce hug. When I saw Victoria heading upstairs, I called Martinez. Emma showed her the evidence we'd gathered. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though okay felt like a distant concept. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me drained. The weight of everything, the accusations, the investigation, the revelations about Christopher's father, pressed down on me. Christopher stepped toward me, his face haunted. "Hannah, I don't know how to even begin to apologize. I should have trusted you, should have seen through her lies. All these years, I never wanted to believe she could be so cruel," I supplied. "Manipulative? Murderous? Your mother destroyed lives, Christopher. Mine, those other women's, and God knows how many more. And you believed her over me." He flinched at my words. "I know. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Maybe we could." "No," I cut him off gently but firmly. "There's no going back, not after this. Your mother may have orchestrated everything, but you showed me who you really are when you doubted me. when you stood silent while she accused me in front of everyone we knew." Detective Martinez returned, her notebook in hand. "Ms. Mitchell, we'll need your official statement. And I believe the press is gathering outside. Would you like to make a statement about your exoneration?" I looked around the opulent library, at the life I'd almost married into, and felt only exhaustion. No statements tonight. My lawyer will handle the press. Later that evening, I sat in Olivia's apartment, wrapped in a blanket and clutching a cup of tea. News alerts kept lighting up my phone. Prominent socialite arrested, Anderson family scandal exposed, bride's vindication, a tale of false accusations and family secrets. "Richard Cooper called," Olivia said, scrolling through my messages. "For me. He wants you back at work immediately, with a promotion and a public apology." The Preston family sent a formal apology, too. Apparently, Caroline had no idea about Victoria's plans. I nodded absently, my mind still processing the night's events. Emma had sent me photos of Victoria being led through her own carefully curated dinner party in handcuffs, her designer dress clashing with the metal restraints. The guests who had once whispered about my supposed theft now watched in shocked silence as their social queen fell from grace. "The other women are coming forward," Olivia continued. "Michael's ex-fiancé, the artist Victoria, drove away from Thomas. They're all telling their stories now. You've started a domino effect." My phone buzzed again, Christopher's 20th call of the night. This time I picked up. "Hannah." His voice was rough with emotion. "The police found Father's old journals in Mother's office. He knew what she was doing to those other women. He was gathering evidence against her. That's why she—" "I'm so sorry, Christopher," I said softly. And I was. Sorry for his loss. Sorry for the years of manipulation he'd endured. Sorry for the mother he'd thought he had. "I know you can't forgive me," he continued, "but please know how deeply I regret not standing by you. You deserved better." After hanging up, I turned to Olivia. "I need to get away from all this, from Boston, from the gossip, from the Anderson name." She nodded understandingly. "I thought you might say that. Remember Daniel Chen, my photographer, friend who's always traveling? He's putting together a documentary project in Southeast Asia. Needs someone to handle the marketing and social media side." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of excitement. "When does he leave?" 2 weeks. Plenty of time to negotiate your settlement with the Andersons. Emma says Christopher wants to make things right financially, given everything that happened. I woke up the next morning to an email from Richard Cooper. Not just an invitation, back to my job, but a formal apology from the board of directors and an offer that made my head spin. Vice President of Global Marketing Strategy. A few months ago, this would have been everything I'd dreamed of. "You should take it," my father said over breakfast. "Show them all you're stronger than their gossip and lies." But I was already crafting my polite rejection. The thought of walking those office halls again, feeling the weight of whispers and stares, dealing with clients who'd believed the worst of me, it felt suffocating. Instead, I met Daniel Chen for coffee at a quiet cafe far from my usual haunts. He spread photos across the table, temples in Thailand, markets in Vietnam, remote villages in Cambodia. His enthusiasm was contagious as he outlined his documentary project. "It's about transformation," he explained, his eyes bright with passion. "How traditional cultures are adapting to the modern world while keeping their identity. We'll be traveling for at least a year, maybe more." "I know nothing about documentary filmmaking," I admitted. He grinned. "But you know marketing, storytelling, how to reach people. That's what we need. Plus," he added more softly, "Olivia told me what happened. Sometimes the best way to find yourself is to get completely lost first." The settlement meeting with the Andersons' lawyers was scheduled for that afternoon. Emma, had texted that Christopher wanted to be there, but I'd requested he stay away. The family's legal team was appropriately contrite, eager to avoid more scandal. Full compensation for all wedding expenses, the lead attorney began, sliding documents across the table. Plus a substantial additional sum in recognition of the damage to your reputation and career prospects. We can also arrange for a public statement from the family. No statement, I interrupted. I don't want my name linked to the Andersons ever again. Just the settlement and an ironclad NDA, from your side, not mine. The figure they offered was staggering, enough to fund several years of travel, to start a new life anywhere I chose. I signed the papers with a steady hand, feeling weights lifting from my shoulders with each signature. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in shades of gold and pink. My apartment was already half-packed, most of my belongings headed for storage. The wedding gifts had been returned, the photos taken down, the life I'd planned filed away like old papers. The morning of my departure from Boston dawned crisp and clear. Standing in my empty apartment, watching the early sunlight paint shadows on the bare walls, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. My life had been packed into 3 boxes in storage and 2 suitcases bound for Southeast Asia. Olivia arrived early to drive me to the airport, her eyes misty despite her attempts to maintain composure. "Promise you'll video call at least once. A week," she demanded, helping me with my bags. "And send lots of photos and be careful and—" My parents were waiting at the terminal, my mother clutching a care package of homemade snacks and travel essentials. "I still think you should let us come visit once you're settled," she fretted, straightening my jacket unnecessarily. "Bangkok? Isn't that far?" "Let her breathe, Jennifer," my father said gently, though I could see the worry in his eyes too. "Hannah needs to do this her own way." The morning news played on the airport televisions. Victoria Anderson's upcoming trial was still making headlines. Her high-powered legal team was already spinning tales of mental illness and temporary insanity. I turned away, focusing instead on the departure board. Daniel was waiting at our gate, his well-worn camera bag and relaxed demeanor a stark contrast to the business travelers around us. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked, handing me a copy of our itinerary. 3 months in Thailand, then Vietnam, Cambodia, and beyond. As we waited to board, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mother's lawyers are pushing for a plea deal. Chris is opposing it, says she needs to face everything she's done. I know you probably don't want updates, but thought you should know. Be safe in your travels. You deserve all the happiness in the world." I stared at the message, remembering the frightened young woman who'd risked everything to help expose her mother's crimes. Emma had her own healing to do, her own path to forge in the aftermath of Victoria's actions. The bustling streets of Bangkok enveloped me in a wave of heat, noise, and exotic scents as soon as I stepped out of Suvarnabhumi Airport. Daniel navigated us through the chaos with practiced ease, leading the way to a waiting taxi. The city sprawled endlessly around us, a mix of gleaming skyscrapers and ancient temples, street food vendors and luxury malls. Our first stop was a boutique hotel in the Old Quarter, where the narrow streets buzzed with life and every corner held a new discovery. Daniel had meetings with local contacts to set up our documentary shoots, leaving me free to explore. Armed with my phone's map and a pocket phrase book, I ventured into the labyrinthine alleys. The morning markets became my sanctuary. Each day, I'd wake before dawn to watch vendors set up their stalls, arranging pyramids of tropical fruits and fresh flowers. An elderly woman who sold mango sticky rice began to recognize me, offering warm smiles and extra coconut cream. She spoke no English, and my Thai was limited to basic phrases, but somehow we developed a comfortable morning ritual. One particular morning, as I sat at her stall attempting to master chopsticks, she gestured to my camera with interest. I showed her some of my photos, and her face lit up at the images of her market. Through gestures and my broken tie, I learned her name was Supaporn, though everyone called her May, meaning mother. She'd been selling at this same spot for 40 years. I began documenting May's daily routine for our project, her 3 a.m. start, the careful preparation of her rice, the relationships she'd built with her regular customers. Her story became our first major piece for the documentary, capturing how traditional market culture survived in the shadow of megamalls and convenience stores. Daniel was impressed with the footage. "This is exactly what we're looking for," he said, reviewing the interviews I'd conducted with May's help. "The personal connection makes the larger story relatable." As weeks passed, I found myself settling into a rhythm far removed from my structured Boston life. My days began in the markets and often ended at hidden jazz bars where expatriate musicians played with local talents. I learned to navigate the city by landmarks rather than street names: the temple with golden spires, the canal where flower sellers gathered, the street art mural of a blue elephant. One evening, while editing footage at a small cafe, I received an email from Olivia. She'd attached a news article. Victoria Anderson had accepted a plea deal, confessing to multiple counts of fraud and evidence tampering. The investigation into her husband's death was ongoing. The last paragraph mentioned that Christopher had stepped down from the family business, choosing instead to work with a nonprofit supporting victims of fraud and defamation. I stared at my screen, surprised by my own lack of reaction. The news felt distant, like reading about strangers in another life. I closed the email without responding and returned to my editing. The story I was working on, about a young Thai woman reviving traditional textile methods while incorporating modern design, felt more real and immediate than anything in my past. My social media coverage of our project was gaining traction. What had started as simple behind-the-scenes posts had evolved into a narrative about transformation and resilience. People connected with the stories we told: the street food vendor's daughter who'd gone to culinary school but returned to preserve, her mother's recipes, the elderly craftsman teaching young artists to blend traditional techniques with contemporary aesthetics. Daniel noticed my growing passion for storytelling. "You've got an eye for this," he said one evening as we reviewed footage on the hotel's rooftop. "The way you frame shots, how you build narratives, you're not just documenting, you're connecting." The compliment made me pause. In Boston, success had been measured in client acquisitions and campaign metrics. Here, it was measured in genuine moments, in stories that touched people's lives. For the first time, I felt like my work had real meaning. Our hotel had become a temporary home. My small balcony transformed into a workspace where I'd edit footage, while listening to the symphony of street life below. The front desk staff had adopted me as their unofficial English teacher, exchanging language lessons during quiet moments. Even the hotel cat, a dignified orange tabby, had decided I was acceptable company during its evening patrols. As our first month in Bangkok drew to a close, Daniel proposed expanding our project. "There's a village in the north," he explained, spreading maps across our usual cafe table. "They're known for their silver work, but they're struggling to compete with mass-produced jewelry. Some of the younger artisans are finding innovative ways to preserve their craft." The idea excited me. We'd been documenting similar stories in Bangkok, but this would be different. A deeper dive into how rural communities adapted to changing times while maintaining their cultural identity. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the city's spires in gold. A year ago, my world had revolved around wedding plans and social expectations. Now, here I was, planning to travel to remote villages to document artisan stories. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd lost a diamond ring but found something far more valuable: purpose. May noticed my distraction the next morning as I made my usual stop for mango sticky rice. Through our peculiar mix of gestures, broken English, and my improving Thai, I explained we'd be leaving for the north soon. Her face fell slightly, but then she disappeared into her stall and returned with a small package wrapped in banana leaf. Inside was a traditional Thai bracelet, simple silver worked into an intricate pattern. She mimed that her grandson had made it, that it was for protection on my journey. The gift brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This woman, who knew nothing of my past, had shown me more genuine kindness than Boston's elite ever had. Our last week in Bangkok was a whirlwind of preparation. Daniel arranged transportation and accommodations while I focused on wrapping up our current stories. I spent extra time with May, documenting her recipes and techniques, promising to share the finished piece with her grandson who managed her social media presence. The night before our departure, my usual cafe owner insisted on preparing a special dinner. Word had spread about our leaving, and throughout the evening, various neighbors stopped by with small gifts and good wishes, handwritten phrases in Thai, local snacks for our journey, even a hand-drawn map of their favorite northern temples. As I packed my bags that night, I realized how much had changed in just 1 month. My wardrobe had evolved from Boston business casual to practical travel wear. My camera, once used mainly for social media snapshots, was now an extension of my storytelling voice. Even my journal entries had transformed from processing past trauma to exploring new discoveries. The morning of our departure, I made one final visit to May's stall. She was waiting with extra mango sticky rice and fierce hugs, treating me like a daughter heading off to college. As our taxi navigated through Bangkok's morning traffic, I watched the familiar streets recede in the window, feeling not loss, but anticipation. The city had been my first step into a new life, but something told me the real journey was just beginning. Chiang Mai greeted us with misty mountains and a gentler pace than Bangkok's constant rush. Our small guest house sat on a quiet soi near the old city walls, where ancient temples shared space with modern coffee shops. The morning air carried the scent of frangipani and coffee roasting at nearby cafes. Our first interview was with Somchai, a master silversmith whose family had practiced their craft for generations. His workshop occupied a traditional wooden house, tools passed down through decades arranged with careful precision. As I set up our camera equipment, I noticed the walls were covered with old photographs. His grandfather teaching apprentices, his father winning awards at craft festivals. "My children have no interest in learning," he told us through our interpreter, his weathered hands continuing to work even as he spoke. "They want office jobs in the city. I understand. This is hard work, and the cheap factory jewelry is killing our business. But these techniques, these patterns, they tell our history." Something in his words resonated deeply with me. How many traditions were lost because adapting seemed too difficult? As I filmed his hands shaping delicate silver wire into intricate patterns, I thought about the stories we lose when we choose the easier path. But then we met Pichaya, Somchai's niece. At 25, she'd returned from university in Bangkok with fresh ideas. In her small studio across town, she combined traditional silversmithing techniques with contemporary design. Her pieces told both old and new stories, ancient hill tribe patterns reimagined for modern tastes. "Uncle Somchai was so angry when I started changing things," she laughed, showing us her latest collection. "But now he sees that by adapting, we keep the craft alive. Each piece I make still carries our family's history, just in a new way." Her studio became our second home over the next few weeks. I found myself drawn to her process, the way she bridged generations through her art. She taught me basic silversmithing techniques in the evenings after filming, her patience reminiscent of May's kindness in Bangkok. One night, as we worked on a simple bracelet design, Pichaya asked about my own story. Perhaps it was the intimacy of the moment, or the way her hands steadied mine as I fumbled with delicate tools, but I found myself telling her everything. The wedding that wasn't Victoria's accusations, the painful betrayal. "Ah," she said thoughtfully, adjusting my grip on the silver wire. "So you understand about reinvention, about taking broken pieces and making something new." Her words struck me with unexpected force. I looked down at the uneven bracelet taking shape under my inexperienced hands. Like me, it was a work in progress, imperfect but holding potential. Our documentary project expanded beyond the silversmith community. We discovered a collective of young artists who were reviving traditional textile techniques with modern sustainable practices. Their workshop, housed in a converted rice mill, hummed with the rhythms of old looms and new ideas. Malai, their leader, had an infectious energy that drew people in. Everyone said traditional weaving was dying, she explained as she showed us around. But look, we use natural dyes, ancient patterns, but we create clothes people actually want to wear. We employ local grandmothers to teach their techniques to young designers. Everyone wins. I spent days documenting their process, from the morning ritual of preparing dyes from local plants to the intricate work of incorporating traditional motifs into contemporary designs. The resulting footage was some of our best yet, capturing the delicate balance between preservation and progress. Daniel noticed the change in my work. "Your eye has evolved," he said, reviewing the day's shots. "You're not just capturing images anymore. You're telling stories with every frame." He was right. My camera had become more than a tool. It was an extension of how I saw the world. Through its lens, I found myself focusing on moments of transformation. The way morning light transformed simple threads into gold. How ancient techniques gained new life in young hands. The subtle shift when an apprentice finally mastered a difficult pattern. Our days fell into a rhythm that felt both productive and peaceful. Mornings were spent filming at various workshops, afternoons editing and conducting interviews. In the evenings, I'd often return to Pichaya's studio, where she continued teaching me silversmithing basics. The mountain village of May Rim challenged everything I thought I knew about adaptation and resilience. Nestled in the highlands north of Chiang Mai, it was a place where ancient traditions collided with modern necessities in unexpected ways. We'd come to document the local hill tribe communities, but what we found was far more complex than our initial brief suggested. Our guide, Kanda, was a young woman who straddled both worlds effortlessly. Born in the village but educated in the city, she'd returned to help her community navigate the changes threatening their way of life. The first morning, she led us through mist-shrouded paths to meet the village elders. The village chief, a dignified man named Sunthorn, welcomed us into his home with traditional tea and searching questions about our intentions. Through Kanda's translation, he shared his concerns about preserving their cultural heritage while helping the younger generation thrive in a changing world. Each year, more young people leave, he said, his weathered face reflecting decades of similar conversations. The old ways are hard. Working the land, maintaining the traditional crafts, it doesn't compete with city salaries. But without our traditions, who are we? Over steaming cups of locally grown tea, we learned about the village's innovative approach to this challenge. Instead of fighting the lure of modernity, they'd found ways to embrace it on their own terms. Solar panels powered traditional looms. Social media marketed ancient textile patterns to global customers. Young people learned coding alongside traditional weaving techniques. I found myself particularly drawn to a group of teenage girls who gathered each evening to learn traditional embroidery from their grandmothers. They'd sit in a circle, smartphones in their laps, ancient patterns taking shape under their fingers, while they discussed their dreams of college and careers. Our journey took an unexpected turn when we reached the remote province of Chiang Rai, where emerald rice paddies stretched endlessly beneath mist-shrouded mountains. Daniel had heard about a unique community of women artisans who were revolutionizing traditional pottery techniques, merging ancient crafts with modern sensibilities. The Women's Cooperative was housed in a sprawling complex of open-air workshops, where the earthy smell of clay mingled with wood smoke from the kilns. Their leader, Prani, was a force of nature, a 60-year-old grandmother with calloused hands and keen business acumen who'd transformed her village's struggling pottery tradition into a thriving enterprise. Everyone said pottery was dying. Prani told us through our interpreter, her hands steadily shaping a delicate tea bowl. The young people were leaving, the old techniques were being forgotten, so I asked myself, what if we stopped fighting change and instead embraced it? Under her guidance, the cooperative had developed a unique style that combined traditional Lana pottery techniques with contemporary design elements. Their pieces were now sought after by high-end hotels and restaurants across Southeast Asia, each one telling a story of adaptation and resilience. As I filmed Prani teaching a group of young apprentices, I noticed something remarkable. Unlike other traditional crafts we'd documented, here the teachers were learning as much as their students. Young women introduced new glazing techniques they'd discovered online, while their elders shared centuries-old secrets of clay preparation. "You see something in this, don't you?" Daniel observed one evening as we reviewed footage. "Something personal." He was right. Watching these women transform their traditional craft into something new yet authentic resonated deeply with my own journey of reinvention. Each piece they created was both an homage to their heritage and a step into the future, much like the stories I was learning to tell through my lens. Prani took me under her wing, insisting I learn the basics of pottery alongside filming. My first attempts were laughably misshapen, but she guided my hands with the same patience she showed her youngest apprentices. In the quiet hours of early morning, before filming began, I found myself drawn to the wheels, finding a meditative peace in the simple act of centering clay. The cooperative had also started an innovative program teaching local children both pottery and digital skills. I watched in amazement as 12-year-olds created traditional designs using 3D modeling software, then applied these patterns to hand-thrown vessels. "This is how we survive," Prani explained, showing me their small computer lab. "We honor the old ways by finding new paths for them to live on. The world changes. We must change with it or disappear." Our arrival in Vietnam marked a stark shift in our documentary's focus. Hanoi's ancient quarter pulsed with an energy entirely different from Thailand's gentle rhythms. Here, tradition and modernity collided in a cacophony of motorbikes, street vendors, and centuries-old architecture. My first story emerged unexpectedly in a tiny alley off Hang Bak Street. Through a weathered doorway, I discovered Madame Lin's ancient printing press, still producing traditional woodblock prints using techniques passed down through generations. The elderly artisan worked alongside her granddaughter Mai, who had abandoned a promising tech career to preserve their family's craft. "Everyone thought I was crazy," Mai explained as she demonstrated the painstaking process of carving intricate designs into wooden blocks. "I had a good job at a software company, but something was missing. When grandmother talked about closing the shop because her hands were getting too weak, I knew I had to come back." The relationship between grandmother and granddaughter became the heart of our story. Madame Lin had initially resisted Mai's attempts to modernize their business, but gradually came to appreciate how digital tools could enhance rather than replace their traditional methods. They now offered custom designs through social media, shipped prints worldwide, and hosted virtual workshops for art students across Asia. I spent weeks documenting their process, from the selection of special paper made in a village outside Hanoi to the mixing of natural pigments using ancient recipes. Each morning, I'd arrive before dawn to capture Madame Lin performing her daily ritual of honoring the craft's guardian spirits, burning incense and offering tea before beginning work. The tiny workshop became my second home. During breaks in filming, Madame Lin would insist on feeding me her homemade pho, while Mai taught me basic Vietnamese phrases. Through their stories, I began to understand how tradition could evolve without being lost. One rainy afternoon, as I helped Mai photograph prints for their online store, she asked about my own story. The words came easier now, less painful with distance and time. When I finished, Madame Lin, who had been quietly working nearby, spoke up in Vietnamese. She says, Mai translated, that sometimes life gives us a gift disguised as loss. Like when the old paper factory closed and we had to find a new supplier. We discovered a better one, making paper the traditional way but with modern improvements. Without that loss, we would never have grown. I found myself at a crossroads in Hoi An, Vietnam's ancient port city famous for its lantern-lit streets and centuries-old architecture. The morning market bustled with life as I followed Thi, a third-generation tailor, through narrow aisles overflowing with silk and hand-woven textiles. Thi's family had owned their shop since French colonial times, preserving traditional Vietnamese, tailoring techniques while adapting to modern demands. Her story fascinated me, how she'd studied fashion design in Paris, but returned home to merge haute couture with traditional craftsmanship. People think tradition means never changing, she mused, her fingers expertly examining a bolt of raw silk. But look at our traditional IO dye. Each generation adds its own touch while keeping the essence. That's how traditions stay alive. Her workshop became my daily filming location. I documented the precise measurements, the careful cutting, the intricate hand-stitching that went into each garment. Modern fashion magazines shared space with ancestral pattern books on her cutting table. A computerized embroidery machine sat next to her grandmother's ancient Singer sewing machine. One afternoon, as monsoon rain drummed against the ancient tile roof, Thi asked to see some of my footage. She watched in silence as images of her work filled my laptop screen. "You understand," she said finally. "You see what others miss, how the old and new dance together." That evening, reviewing my shots, I realized how much my own perspective had evolved. 6 months ago, I'd been focused on marketing metrics and social media engagement. Now I was capturing stories of transformation and resilience, finding beauty in the spaces between tradition and change. My phone buzzed, an email from Olivia. She'd attached an article about Victoria Anderson's sentencing, 5 years in prison, plus restitution to all her victims. Christopher had testified against her, detailing years of manipulation and control. I closed the email without finishing. Realizing those events felt like stories from another life. The afternoon sun filtered through Thi's workshop, casting patterns on the antique wooden floors as I filmed her working. Her fingers danced across silk fabric, each movement precise and purposeful. She was teaching her newest apprentice, a young woman named Mai, the art of hand-rolling hems, a technique passed down through generations. In old times, Thi explained, demonstrating the delicate motion, a lady's status could be judged by her hem. Machine-made looks different from hand-rolled. Some things technology cannot improve. We'd been in Hoi An for 3 weeks, documenting not just Thi's work, but the entire ecosystem of traditional textile arts that thrived in this ancient port city. Each morning, I'd follow her to the silk village outside town, where families still raised silkworms and wove fabric using centuries-old methods. The silk village had become one of my favorite filming locations. Here, modern solar-powered looms operated alongside traditional hand-weaving frames. Young weavers created contemporary designs while preserving ancient techniques. It was a perfect metaphor for the evolution of craft, not losing tradition but building upon it. Thi's own story embodied this balance. After studying in Paris, she'd returned home with dreams of modernizing her family's business. Her mother initially resisted, clinging to traditional methods. But gradually, they found middle ground. Now, their shop used computer-aided design for pattern making while maintaining hand-finishing techniques that gave each garment its soul. "Watch Mai's hands," Thi instructed as I filmed. "See how she learns the rhythm? This cannot be taught from books or videos. It must be felt, like learning to dance." Mai's journey particularly intrigued me. She'd left a corporate job in Ho Chi Minh City to apprentice with Thi, trading air-conditioned offices for the humid workshop. "Everyone thought I was crazy," she told me during a break. "But in my old job, I felt disconnected. Here, I'm part of something larger than myself." As I captured their daily interactions, I found myself reflecting on my own transformation. Like I'd left a successful career to pursue something less certain but more meaningful. Through my lens, I wasn't just documenting their craft. I was recording a philosophy of life, one that valued connection and authenticity over superficial success. One evening, as golden hour light streamed through the workshop's ancient windows, Thea asked to see my recent footage. She watched intently as scenes from the Silk Village played across my laptop screen. Elderly masters teaching young apprentices, traditional patterns being adapted for modern tastes, the eternal dance of old and new. "You have good eyes," she said finally. "You see the stories behind the stories, like this shot here." She pointed to a sequence showing 3 generations of women working together at a loom. "You captured not just the weaving, but the passing of knowledge, the bonds between us." Her words touched something deep within me. In Boston, I'd been skilled at crafting marketing narratives that sold products. Here, I was learning to tell stories that mattered, that preserved memories and traditions while embracing change. That night, editing in my small rented room above an ancient tea shop, I received an unexpected email. A major documentary festival had seen our online segments and wanted to feature our work. They were particularly interested in how we captured the evolution of traditional crafts in modern Asia. Daniel was ecstatic when I told him, "This could change everything," he said over breakfast pho the next morning. "We could expand the project, travel to more countries, tell more stories." The possibility both excited and terrified me. 6 months ago, I'd fled Boston with no clear plan beyond escape. Now, I was being offered a chance to turn this journey of healing into something larger, something that could help preserve and celebrate the very traditions I'd been documenting. They found me in her workshop later that day, lost in thought as I filmed Mai practicing her stitches. "You look troubled," she observed, settling beside me with a pot of green tea. I shared my thoughts about the festival opportunity, my uncertainties about taking on such a large project. She listened quietly, her weathered hands smoothing a piece of silk as she considered her response. "When I first returned from Paris," she said finally, "I was full of grand plans but also full of doubt. My mother told me something I never forgot. Tradition is not about keeping things the same. It's about keeping them meaningful. Perhaps your journey is like that too." The wisdom in her words struck me. My own transformation had been about finding meaning, about taking the broken pieces of my old life and creating something new and authentic. The stories I was telling through my camera were helping others do the same. Over the next few days, as I continued filming in the workshop and Silk Village, I began to see everything through this new lens. Each artisan I documented wasn't just preserving techniques, they were keeping their culture meaningful in a changing world. Their courage in adapting tradition rather than abandoning it spoke to my own journey of reinvention. Mai noticed my renewed energy as I filmed her learning to dye silk using traditional plant-based colors combined with modern fixing agents. "You seem different," she observed. "More focused?" "I'm learning to see better," I replied, adjusting my camera to capture the way sunlight played across the dye vats. "Not just with the camera, but with my heart." She nodded, understanding, her hands steady as she lifted a length of silk from the indigo bath. "That's what Thea always says, that true craft comes from the heart, not just the hands." The bustling night markets of Luang Prabang, Laos, cast a different kind of spell compared to the ancient port towns of Vietnam. Lanterns illuminated the narrow streets as I followed Kamla, a master weaver who'd agreed to let me document her work preserving traditional Laotian textile arts. Her studio occupied an old French colonial building, its high ceilings and worn wooden floors telling stories of centuries past. Looms of various sizes filled the space, from ancient hand-built frames to modern adaptations that allowed for more complex patterns while maintaining traditional techniques. "My grandmother taught me to weave when I was 6, Kamla shared. her hands moving steadily across the threads of an intricate silk pattern. She said our stories are in these patterns, our history, our beliefs, our dreams. But now, young people want fast fashion from Thailand and China. They forget the meaning behind our textiles. Yet Kamla had found an innovative way to bridge this generational gap. Her studio doubled as a training center where she taught both traditional weaving and modern design to young women from local villages. The program combined ancient pattern making with digital marketing skills, enabling graduates to build sustainable businesses around their craft. I spent days documenting her classes, capturing the moment when young hands first learned to feel the rhythm of the loom, the quiet pride in mastering a difficult pattern, the way ancient motifs evolved under fresh interpretations. Each frame told a story of tradition finding new life through adaptation. One of her students, a bright-eyed young woman named Baunmi, particularly caught my attention. She'd left a promising career in Vientiane's growing tech sector to learn weaving, much to her family's confusion. "They think I'm throwing away my future," she confided during a filming break, "but I feel like I'm reclaiming it instead." The festival organizers had been right. There was something universal in these stories of tradition meeting modernity. Our documentary segments were gaining traction online, resonating with viewers around the world. Each day brought new messages from people sharing their own stories of preserving cultural heritage in a rapidly changing world. Daniel saw the potential for something bigger. "We could expand this into a series," he suggested one evening as we reviewed footage. Not just crafts, but food, music, architecture, all the ways people are keeping their traditions alive by allowing them to evolve. The idea both excited and challenged me. We'd been on the road for 8 months now, and I'd found a peace in this nomadic existence that I'd never known in Boston. Each new location, each artisan's story, helped me understand my own journey of transformation better. The bustling night markets of Luang Prabang, Laos, illuminated the ancient streets as I followed Kamla, a master weaver preserving traditional textile arts. Her studio, housed in a French colonial building, breathed history through its weathered wooden floors and soaring ceilings. Ancient looms stood beside their modern counterparts, a physical representation of tradition meeting innovation. "My grandmother taught me to weave when I was 6, Kamla shared, her fingers dancing across silk threads. "She said our stories live in these patterns, our history, beliefs, dreams. But now, young people want fast fashion. They forget the meaning in our textiles." Yet Kamla refused to let these traditions fade. Her studio doubled as a training center, teaching both ancient weaving and modern business skills to young women from surrounding villages. Here, traditional pattern making merged with digital marketing, creating sustainable careers from ancestral crafts. Baunmi, one of her most promising students, had left a lucrative tech job in Vientiane to learn weaving. "My parents think I'm throwing away my future," she confided during a filming break. "But this feels like coming home to something I didn't know I'd lost." I spent weeks documenting their stories, capturing the moment young hands first found the loom's rhythm, the quiet triumph of mastering complex patterns, the way ancient motifs evolved through fresh interpretations. Each frame revealed tradition not as a static relic, but as a living, breathing entity capable of growth and adaptation. The festival organizers' interest in our work sparked something unexpected. Messages poured in from viewers worldwide, sharing their own stories of preserving cultural heritage in modern times. Our documentary had touched a universal chord, the desire to maintain meaningful connections to our past while embracing the future. "We could expand this into a series," Daniel A. suggested as we reviewed footage. "Not just crafts, but food, music, architecture, all the ways people are keeping their traditions alive by allowing them to evolve." The prospect both thrilled and terrified me. We'd been traveling for 8 months, and I'd found unexpected peace in this nomadic existence. Each new location, each artisan's story, helped me understand my own transformation better. The broken pieces of my past were slowly reforming into something new and meaningful. One morning, as I filmed Kamla teaching Bound Me an intricate brocade technique, an email notification lit up my phone. Christopher's name in my inbox still triggered a flutter of anxiety, but it was fainter now, more distant. His message was simple. The investigation into his father's death had concluded. Victoria had accepted a plea deal, confessing to years of manipulation and control. He was using his portion of the family fortune to establish a foundation supporting traditional artisans worldwide. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd accused me of stealing family heirlooms had actually stolen something far more precious: trust, dignity, lives. Yet here I was, documenting people who preserved their heritage not through hoarding and control, but through sharing and adaptation. Kamla noticed my distraction. "Something troubles you?" she asked, pausing her work. Through our interpreter, I shared pieces of my story: the false accusations, the betrayal, the unexpected journey that led me here. She listened thoughtfully, her weathered hands still moving across the loom. "In our weaving," she said finally, "mistakes become part of the pattern. What looks like a flaw up close adds character to the whole design. Perhaps life is like this too." Her words stayed with me as I continued filming. I began to see how my own pattern had shifted, from the rigid, predictable design I'd planned in Boston to something more complex and authentic. The broken engagement, the public humiliation, the flight across the world, all these flaws had led me to exactly where I needed to be. That evening, in my small guest house room overlooking the Mekong River, I made a decision. Our documentary wouldn't just be about traditional crafts adapting to modern times. It would explore how maintaining connections to our past can help us navigate change and loss, how ancient wisdom can light the way forward. I called Daniel to share my vision. "The festival deadline is in 3 months," he reminded me. "If we're expanding the scope, we'll need to start planning the next phase." Now, the next morning, I arrived at Kamla's studio before dawn to capture the early light on the looms. Bound Me was already there, practicing basic weaving patterns. She'd developed a technique of incorporating recycled materials into traditional designs, creating something entirely new while honoring ancient methods. "My grandmother cried when she saw my first piece," she told me as I filmed. "Not because I changed the patterns, but because she recognized them even in their new form. She said tradition isn't about perfect repetition. It's about keeping the heart of things alive." As the sun rose over Luang Prabang, casting golden light through the studio's colonial windows, I watched Kamla begin her day with a traditional blessing of her looms. The quiet ceremony hadn't changed in generations, yet the space around it had evolved. Young women with smartphones documented their work for Instagram. Ancient patterns found new life on computer screens. Traditional techniques adapted to contemporary demands. This was what our documentary needed to capture. Not just the preservation of craft, but the preservation of meaning. How tradition could be both anchor and sail, keeping us connected to our roots while allowing us to explore new horizons. I spent the rest of the day filming Kamla's advanced students as they prepared pieces for an upcoming exhibition. Each weaver brought their own interpretation to traditional patterns. One incorporated contemporary symbols into ancient motifs. Another experimented with unexpected color combinations. Yet another created entirely new patterns based on traditional principles. As I watched them work, I thought about my own transformation. Like these weavers, I'd taken the patterns of my past, my skills in marketing and storytelling, and adapted them into something new. The camera had become my loom, documenting how others navigated similar journeys of change and preservation. That evening, reviewing the day's footage with Daniel, we began mapping out the expanded documentary series. Each episode would focus on a different craft tradition, exploring how artisans balanced preservation with innovation. But more than that, It would tell the universal story of how we all navigate change while keeping our connections to what matters most. "This isn't just about crafts anymore, is it?" Daniel observed, noting how our focus had shifted from pure documentation to something deeper. "It never was," I replied, watching the screen where Baunmi's hands moved across her loom, creating something both ancient and entirely new. It's about finding ways to carry what's meaningful forward, even when everything around us changes. The monsoon rains of Bali provided a dramatic backdrop as I set up my camera in Maid's traditional family compound. As one of the island's few remaining mask carvers, Maid represented a dying art form struggling to find its place in the modern world. The rhythmic sound of his chisel against wood blended with the steady drumming of rain on ancient tiles. Each mask holds a spirit, Maid explained through our interpreter, his weathered hands moving deftly across a half-finished piece. Not just the characters from our sacred dances, but the spirit of the tree, the tools, the carver's own soul. This is why mass-produced masks have no power. They lack spirit. I'd been drawn to Bali for our documentary's final segment, sensing that here, in this island of ancient traditions and rapid tourism development, we might find the perfect conclusion to our story. Maid's workshop offered a microcosm of the larger themes we'd been exploring: the tension between preservation and adaptation, the search for authenticity in a changing world. His grandson, Ketut, represented the new generation of Balinese artisans. Armed with both traditional carving skills and a degree in fine arts from Jakarta, he was finding innovative ways to keep the mask-making tradition alive. Their workshop had become a space where ancient and modern coexisted. Sacred masks for temple ceremonies shared space with contemporary pieces that incorporated traditional techniques into modern artistic expressions. "The tourists want authentic Balinese masks," Ketut said, showing me his latest work. "But what is authentic? My grandfather's masks are traditional, yes, but even he learned new techniques from his teachers. Tradition isn't frozen in time. It's alive, growing, changing." As I filmed their daily routines, I found myself reflecting on my own journey. The past year had transformed me in ways I never could have imagined when I fled Boston. Like these masks, I had been reshaped by skilled hands, the artisans who'd shared their stories, the communities that had welcomed me, the experiences that had carved away my old assumptions about success and belonging. The documentary festival was 2 weeks away. Our series, now titled Living Traditions, had evolved into something far richer than we'd initially planned. Through the stories of weavers, potters, silversmiths, and now mask carvers, we'd captured not just the preservation of craft traditions, but the universal human experience of navigating change while keeping our connections to what matters most. One morning, as I filmed Maid performing the traditional blessing of his tools, my phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. She'd been offered a teaching position in Singapore and was considering taking it. "Maybe it's time for my own adventure," she wrote. "You've shown me it's never too late to reshape your life." Her words resonated with what I'd been learning from Maid and Ketut. Like their masks, which began as simple blocks of wood and gradually revealed their true nature through careful carving, we too could be transformed without losing our essential selves. The rain had paused, and afternoon sunlight filtered through the compound's ancient trees as I interviewed Maid about the spiritual aspects of mask carving. He spoke of how each mask reveals itself gradually, how the carver must listen to the wood and the spirits to find the true face within. "Sometimes," he said, his eyes twinkling, "the face that emerges is not the one we planned. But if we trust the process, if we respect the spirit of the wood, it becomes what it was always meant to be." Ketut, translating his grandfather's words, added his own insight. "It's like life, yes? We make plans, but the true shape of our journey often reveals itself in unexpected ways." That evening, reviewing footage in my small villa overlooking the rice terraces, I received an email that would have once shattered my world. Christopher was getting married, to neither me nor Caroline Preston, but to a humanitarian worker he'd met through his foundation work. A year ago, this news would have felt like another betrayal. Now it felt like the final piece of wood falling away to reveal the true shape of things. I wrote back a simple, sincere congratulation. Like maids' masks, my life had taken an unexpected form, but one that felt more authentic than anything I could have planned. The documentary series was gaining international attention. We'd been offered funding for a second season, exploring living traditions in other parts of the world. The next morning, I arrived at the workshop before dawn to find Maid already at work. He was starting a new mask and invited me to document the entire process from blessing the wood to the final painting. As my camera rolled, he spoke about how each mask carries the stories of all who touched it, the tree it came from, the carver, who shaped it, the dancers who would wear it, the audiences who would witness its power. In the old days, he said, masks were seen as bridges between worlds, the sacred and mundane, past and present, visible and invisible. Perhaps they still are, just in new ways. Cathedral had begun incorporating contemporary elements into traditional designs, environmental themes, social commentary, personal stories of loss and transformation. Yet each piece still carried the spiritual weight of ancient tradition, the power to transform both maker and viewer. Some people say we're destroying tradition by changing it, Cathedral reflected as I filmed him working on a mask that blended traditional techniques with modern themes. But tradition that can't adapt is already dead. We keep it alive by helping it grow. As the festival date approached, I found myself working late into the night, weaving together footage from our year-long journey. Each artisan's story contributed to a larger narrative about the nature of tradition and change, loss and renewal. Maid's masks became a powerful metaphor for this transformation, how something solid and unchanging could be carved into new forms while retaining its essential spirit. The morning I was scheduled to leave Bali, Maid presented me with an unexpected gift, a small mask he'd carved specially for me. Unlike his traditional pieces, this one seemed to capture something of my own journey. One side of the face reflected classical Balinese design, while the other incorporated elements from all the crafts we'd documented. Textile patterns from Laos, pottery motifs from Thailand, silverwork designs from Vietnam. Every mask tells a story, he said as he placed it in my hands. This one tells yours, the story of someone who learned to see tradition not as a cage, but as wings. Standing in his workshop one last time, surrounded by the faces he'd revealed, from simple blocks of wood, I understood what he meant. Like these masks, we all wear different faces as we move through life. The art lies not in trying to preserve one unchanging expression, but in finding the courage to let new faces emerge while keeping our core truth intact. 2 years had passed since that fateful wedding day in Boston. I stood on the balcony of my apartment in Singapore, where the modern skyline glittered against the tropical sunset. The humidity wrapped around me like a familiar embrace, so different from the crisp New England air I'd once called home. Our documentary series, Living Traditions, had exceeded all expectations. The first season had won multiple awards, including Best Documentary Series at the Asian Film Awards. We'd just finished editing the final episode of our second season, which would premiere at next month's Asia Pacific Film Festival. My phone buzzed with a message from Prani, her pottery cooperative, in Thailand had expanded to 3 villages. Attached was a video of young artisans using 3D modeling to create traditional patterns, then applying them to hand-thrown vessels. The perfect blend of old and new that had become our documentary's hallmark. Olivia had made the move to Singapore, 6 months after I'd settled here, taking a position at an international school. Our Sunday brunches had become a cherished ritual, a piece of home transplanted to this vibrant city-state. She sat across from me now, at our favorite rooftop cafe, scanning reviews of our latest episode. "Listen to this," she said, reading from her tablet. "Living Traditions doesn't just document crafts, it captures the essence of human adaptation and resilience. Through Mitchell's lens, we see how traditional arts survive not by remaining static, but by evolving while keeping their soul intact." "They get it, Hannah. They really get what you're trying to show." I smiled, remembering how far we'd come from those first uncertain days in Bangkok. May still sent me mango sticky rice recipes through her grandson's Instagram, each message a reminder of where this journey began. Her market stall had become a featured spot on food tours, where she taught visitors about traditional Thai breakfast. Culture. Pichaya's silver jewelry designs had gained international recognition. She'd opened a school in Chiang Mai, teaching traditional silversmithing techniques alongside contemporary design. Some of her pieces were inspired by our documentary, merging ancient hill tribe patterns with modern aesthetics. My phone chimed again. Kamla in Laos sharing photos of her expanded weaving school. Government funding had allowed her to establish satellite programs in remote villages, each equipped with both traditional looms and digital design tools. Baunmi, once her student, now ran the technology integration program. "Have you seen this?" Olivia slid her tablet across the table. The screen showed a news article about Victoria Anderson's early release and memoir. All proceeds were going to organizations supporting traditional artisans, an irony not lost on me. I set the tablet aside, surprised by my own lack of reaction. Victoria, Christopher, that life in Boston. They felt like characters in a story I'd read long ago. My world now revolved around different axes. The artisan communities we documented, the students I mentored at the local film school, the rich tapestry of traditions I'd made my life's work to preserve and celebrate. Maid's Mask still held pride of place in my apartment, its dual nature reflecting my own transformation. One side traditional, one side contemporary, both authentically true. His grandson Ketut had become a celebrated artist, his work bridging cultures and generations while maintaining the spiritual essence of Balinese mask making. Daniel had moved on to other projects, but we collaborated occasionally. Our last piece together focused on Singapore's own struggle to maintain its cultural heritage amid rapid development. The documentary highlighted traditional craftsmen working in the shadows of skyscrapers, keeping ancient skills alive in one of Asia's most modern cities. The monsoon season painted Singapore's skyline in watercolor shades of gray, as I reviewed footage from our latest documentary shoot. The small fishing village on Malaysia's east coast had revealed stories that went far beyond traditional fishing methods. Tales of communities adapting to climate change, young people finding new ways to preserve their heritage while embracing modern sustainability practices. My apartment, overlooking the vibrant Arab Street district, had become both editing suite and cultural crossroads. The walls displayed artifacts from our filming locations: Maid's Mask from Bali, Kamla's woven, textile from Laos, Pichaya's silver bracelet from Chiang Mai. Each piece told a story of transformation, much like my own. The film festival jury had been particularly moved by our latest episode, focusing on a young marine biologist named Amira. She'd returned to her grandmother's fishing village armed with degrees from prestigious universities, not to change traditional ways, but to understand them more deeply. Through her story, we captured how ancient fishing practices contained sophisticated knowledge about marine ecosystems. "My grandmother can predict storms 3 days before any weather app," Amira told us during filming, her eyes bright with pride. "She reads the clouds, the wind patterns, the way fish behave. This isn't superstition, it's generations of careful observation." Our cameras followed as she worked with village elders to document their traditional ecological knowledge, creating a database that combined their wisdom with modern scientific data. The result was a more comprehensive understanding of local marine ecosystems than either approach could provide alone. The scene playing on my editing screen showed Amira and her grandmother mapping fishing grounds using both GPS coordinates and traditional navigation methods based on cloud patterns and ocean currents. Their collaboration perfectly captured what our series had become about, not just preserving traditions, but revealing their relevance to contemporary challenges. Olivia watched the footage with me, her teacher's perspective adding valuable insights. "This is what education should be," she observed. "Not replacing old knowledge with new, but building bridges between them." My phone chimed with messages from artisans we'd featured in previous episodes. May's granddaughter in Bangkok had started a food history project, documenting traditional recipes and their cultural significance. Prani's Pottery Cooperative in Thailand was collaborating with environmental scientists, using traditional clay working techniques to create natural water filtration systems. The documentary series had taken on a life of its own, spawning community projects and collaborations across Southeast Asia. Young people who'd once dismissed traditional crafts as outdated were discovering their value through a modern lens. Traditional artisans who'd feared their knowledge would die with them found new purpose in mentoring the next generation. The remote mountain village in northern Philippines unfolded before me like a living tapestry. Here, in the ancient rice terraces of the Cordilleras, I found myself documenting perhaps our most challenging story yet. Generations of indigenous knowledge about rice cultivation had created these magnificent terraces, often called the eighth wonder of the world. Now, these same traditional farming methods were proving crucial in the face of climate change. Maria, our local guide and a member of the indigenous Ifugao people, led me through narrow paths between the terraces. The morning mist clung to the mountainsides as farmers began their day's work, their movements following rhythms established by their ancestors centuries ago. "Each step of these terraces tells a story," Maria explained, pausing to let me capture footage of an elderly farmer teaching his granddaughter the traditional way to transplant rice seedlings. "Our challenge isn't just preserving the terraces themselves, but the knowledge that created them." Through my lens, I captured the intricate irrigation systems that had sustained these terraces for generations. The engineering was sophisticated yet sustainable, using bamboo pipes and stone channels to distribute water evenly across the mountainside. Modern agricultural experts were now studying these traditional methods for insights into sustainable farming. "People used to think our ways were primitive," Maria continued, pointing out how the terraces were built to follow the mountain's natural contours. "Now they're realizing our ancestors understood things about working with nature that modern science is just beginning to grasp." The real story emerged as we spent time with the younger generation of farmers. Unlike many rural communities we'd documented, here young people were returning to their ancestral lands, armed with degrees in environmental science and agricultural engineering. They weren't abandoning tradition for modernity, but rather finding ways to strengthen ancient practices with new understanding. Our journey had led us back to Singapore for the premiere of our documentary series finale. The rooftop venue overlooked the same skyline I'd grown to love, where modern architecture harmonized with preserved heritage buildings. It seemed fitting to end our story here, in a city that had mastered the delicate dance between tradition and progress. The screening room buzzed with energy as artisans from across Asia gathered. Faces I'd filmed over months of travel, people whose stories had become intertwined with my own. May had flown in from Bangkok, her traditional Thai silk, gleaming under modern lights. Pichaya wore her own silver creations, each piece telling a story of transformation. Maid's mask designs adorned the walls, traditional and contemporary pieces displayed side by side. Kamla had brought her newest weaving students, their eyes wide as they met artisans they'd only seen in our documentaries. Prani proudly displayed her latest pottery innovations, vessels that combined traditional clay working techniques with modern water purification technology. Even Somchai, who'd once resisted any change to his silversmithing methods, showcased pieces that merged ancient patterns with contemporary designs. Maria had traveled from the Cordillera rice terraces, bringing with her a presentation about how their community had incorporated traditional farming wisdom into modern climate resilience strategies. Her work had inspired similar projects across Southeast Asia, where indigenous knowledge was being recognized as crucial for environmental conservation. Tonight's final episode was different from the others. Instead of focusing on a single craft or community, it wove together the stories of young artisans who were revolutionizing traditional crafts across Asia. A ceramicist using ancestral glazing techniques to create modern environmental sensors. A weaver incorporating recycled materials into traditional patterns. A metalworker merging ancient techniques with 3D printing. Between interviews, the documentary showcased the stunning landscapes where these traditions had evolved. Mist-shrouded mountains, ancient temples, bustling markets, and quiet workshops where age-old skills were being passed down and transformed. The soundtrack featured traditional music reimagined by contemporary composers, another bridge between past and present. The segment about May's market stall brought tears to many eyes. What had started as a simple morning ritual of making mango sticky rice had evolved into a cultural preservation project. Her grandson had created an app that connected traditional food vendors with younger customers, helping preserve Bangkok's street food heritage while adapting to modern lifestyles. Pichaya's story demonstrated how traditional crafts could address contemporary challenges. Her silver jewelry now incorporated pollution-detecting elements, turning ancient metalworking techniques into tools for environmental awareness. Young apprentices in her workshop learned both traditional methods and modern applications, ensuring the craft's relevance for future generations. As the film progressed, we saw how Maid's mask-making traditions had influenced contemporary theater and performance art. Cathedral had collaborated with digital artists to create installations where traditional masks interacted with projection mapping, bringing ancient stories to life in new ways. The documentary's final sequence moved many to tears. It showed artisans from different countries and traditions working together, sharing techniques and innovations. A Thai weaver teaching a Laotian potter about natural dyes. A Balinese woodcarver learning about Filipino indigenous patterns. These connections had spawned collaborations we never could have imagined when we started filming. After the screening, the rooftop transformed into a celebration of everything we'd documented. The air filled with multiple languages as artisans, from different traditions shared techniques and ideas. Young innovators eagerly learned from traditional masters, while elders expressed amazement at how their ancient crafts could solve modern problems. A group of tech entrepreneurs had attended the screening, and I watched as they engaged in animated discussions with traditional craftspeople about potential collaborations. An AI researcher talked with Maid about capturing the subtle movements of traditional mask dances. A sustainable fashion designer consulted with Kamla about incorporating traditional weaving patterns into biodegradable fabrics. The event had also attracted attention from environmental organizations and cultural preservation foundations. They recognized that these traditional practices often contained solutions to contemporary challenges: sustainable resource management, waste reduction, community resilience. What had begun as a documentary project was evolving into a movement. Later that night, after most guests had departed, I found myself in conversation with a group of young artisans. They spoke excitedly about their plans to establish a network of craft innovation hubs across Asia, where traditional techniques could be explored and adapted for modern applications. Their enthusiasm reminded me of my own transformation, how running from one life had led me to discover a deeper purpose. Olivia joined us, bringing a special surprise: a book she'd compiled of messages from artisans we'd featured over the months. Each page contained not just thank you notes, but stories of how documenting their crafts had impacted their communities. Small workshops had grown into thriving enterprises. Traditional techniques had found new relevance in solving modern problems. Ancient wisdom was being preserved and transformed for future generations. Remember when you first arrived in Bangkok? May's message read. You were looking for escape, but you found purpose instead. Now look at how many lives you've touched. Her grandson had added a photo of their market stall, now a cultural heritage site where traditional food vendors taught cooking classes to international tourists. The night air was thick with possibility as conversations continued around the day. Rooftop. A group of students from Singapore's top design school huddled around Prani, fascinated by how her traditional pottery techniques could be applied to sustainable architecture. Maid and Ketut were demonstrating mask carving techniques to a mixed audience of theater directors and virtual reality developers. Maria shared updates about the Rice Terraces project, how their traditional farming methods had caught the attention of climate scientists studying sustainable agriculture. Your documentary didn't just tell our story, she said. It helped us see our own traditions through new eyes. The success of our series had led to unexpected opportunities. Universities wanted to create courses about traditional craft innovation. Tech companies were interested in developing apps to preserve and share traditional knowledge. Environmental. Organizations recognized the value of ancient wisdom in addressing modern challenges. But most meaningful were the personal transformations. Young people who'd once dismissed their cultural heritage as outdated were now its proudest advocates. Traditional artisans who'd feared their knowledge would die with them had found new purpose in mentoring the next generation. Communities that had been losing their young people to cities were seeing them return, armed with new ideas for keeping traditions alive. As the evening wound down, I found a quiet corner to absorb it all. The Singapore skyline glittered before me, a perfect metaphor for what we'd accomplished. Tradition and progress existing in harmony, each making the other stronger. My phone buzzed with messages from around the world, people sharing how our documentaries had inspired them to explore their own cultural heritage. Looking out over the city, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of betrayal had led to purpose. Running away had become running towards something greater than myself. Like the crafts we'd documented, I too had been transformed while keeping my essential nature intact. What's next? A young filmmaker asked, joining me at the railing. She'd been inspired by our series to start documenting traditional crafts in her own community. I shared our vision for the future. We weren't just telling stories anymore. We were helping write the next chapter of these living traditions. Our foundation would fund innovative projects that bridged traditional crafts with contemporary needs. We'd establish more cultural exchange programs, connecting artisans across borders. Most importantly, we'd continue showing how ancient wisdom could light the way forward. The night ended with an impromptu ceremony. Each artisan added a piece of their work to a collaborative installation. Maid's masks next to Kamla's textiles. Pichaya's silverwork intertwined with Prani's pottery. A physical representation of how traditions could grow stronger by growing together. As the last guests departed, I remained on the rooftop, watching the first hints of dawn color the sky. My phone lit up with one final message. The documentary series had been picked up by an international streaming platform. Our stories of tradition, adaptation, and resilience would now reach audiences worldwide. Up next, you've got 2 more. Standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.